The politics of Watson's attack on Chrysopassingok is the inverted politics of industrial production. If industry, capitalist or socialist, could only see whales as valuable as dead, the corrective was to only see them as valuable alive. But it is another argument that renounces death, not the denial of entropy through endless invisible consumption, but the denial that death is bound up with human life at all. It is a vision that retains a strict separation between people and the rest of the world. Watson is inheritor of practices of ignoring entropy, either by separating consumption from production or by imagining that human beings are above consuming at all, which is another way of imagining that humans live in a state of exception from the rest of nature and have a kind of agency that grants us great freedom. The freedom, in this case, to create our ethics alone out of the world. Yet, there is no option of retreat, of pure withdrawal from the world around us. All of us beings that do not photosynthesize must consume. We do not really produce any raw stuff, only rework what plants work up first. We are less islands than constellations, dependent on the light of a distant star. The question then is what we choose to refract to each other. Which brings me to my speculative close. One way of reading the history of humans and whales over the last 2,000 years is as a history in which bowheads themselves have intimated through their behavior what kind of relationship they will tolerate with people. If we take seriously the understanding of bowheads from the people who know them best, the hunters who have lived with them for longer than Christianity has existed, then the history speaks quite clearly. Whales did not consent to be killed for the market or for the plan. Nor did the market or the socialist plan have space in their human-focused ideals to imagine whales as capable of making judgments, despite the experience of socialist and capitalist crews who killed them. Bowheads were not part of the political community in either capitalist or socialist worlds, which killed for economic ideals that saw the trajectory of history as essentially independent from any being that was not human. And even as Paul Watson made people witness to whale death, he did not argue that people cannot live without whales. The hierarchy of human exception remained. But to live in the Arctic is to understand the inevitability of death and to acknowledge the frailty of human dependence on the wills and beings of others. To rise in an Arctic morning and walk out into the world is to understand that you may not walk back in your particular bodily form. To walk out in the morning is to recognize personal dependence on the persons of others and the decisions they will make of you. Perhaps I will be their food, and perhaps they will be mine. The importance of this idea of interdependence and obligation beyond the self and the species might seem academic in the 21st century, when few countries still whale at industrial pitch. Do we not leave whales alone now to break open the ocean with their backs in peace? But the truth is we do not. We can deny it, imagine ourselves apart, 8 billion tiny islands, but our way of living is still necessarily embedded in the world. Necessarily, and for the whales, often quite terribly. Even now that no one wears lipstick made out of whale fat or eats whale margarine, the habits of consumption encouraged by the global economy are still killing them. From the North Atlantic right whales that are going extinct essentially in real time as they're hit by traffic in shipping lanes off the East Coast, to the mass die-offs of gray whales in the North Pacific, to the sperm whales that beach repeatedly with stomachs filled with plastic. The shipping traffic off the port that I now call home has killed more whales than Chrysopassingok will in a lifetime. And there is no space for whales to judge us in the prices of goods that are delivered into the port of Providence. But what if we think history and present not as humans acting in isolation, but in relation? One result is that the idea of independence from nature and endless growth both appear as myths, not as facts. Another is how clearly we can see that the economic form we live with now runs yet on the logic of the slaughterhouse, carried forth by labor required to reduce the world to tallies of profit. It is blind to the work of a whale and to the wills, emotions, and even ethical judgments of other living beings.